Chapter 8. The most beautiful place imaginable. Captain Dale Black has logged 17,000 hours flying around the globe as a commercial airline pilot. During that time, he has also volunteered on almost 1,000 flights to 50 countries building orphanages, medical clinics, and churches in order to share God's love with people in need. Captain Black says his motivation comes from a horrible airline accident and what he saw that changed his life. Dale had always dreamed of being a commercial pilot. By 19, he already had his pilot's license. Chuck and Jean, commercial pilots who had taken Dale under their wings, kindly let Dale fly with them on delivery runs across California to log more hours. One fateful day, the three of them took off in a twin-engine Piper Navajo into a clear Los Angeles sky. Jean throttled to maximum takeoff power, but suddenly they found themselves airborne at an abnormally slow speed. Unable to clear the tops of the trees, Jean veered off directly into a 75-foot-high aviation monument. The plane disintegrated as the three pilots smashed into the stone edifice at 135 miles per hour, then plunged 70 feet to the ground. Only Dale survived, sort of. The last thing I remembered was the sight of Chuck's hands on the controls, violently wrenching the flight controls fully left and fully back. Suddenly I found myself suspended in midair, hovering over the wreckage of my body. My gray pants and short-sleeve shirt were torn to shreds and soaked in blood. I sped through what appeared to be a narrow pathway. It wasn't a tunnel of light that I was traveling through. It was a path in the darkness that was delineated by the light. Outside of this pathway was total darkness. But in the darkness millions of tiny spheres of light zoomed past as I traveled through what looked like deep space, almost as if a jet were flying through a snowstorm at night. At this time, I became aware that I was not traveling alone. Accompanying me were two angelic escorts dressed in seamless white garments woven with silver threads. They had no discernible gender but appeared masculine and larger than I was. Remarkably, my peripheral vision was enhanced, and I could see both of their glowing faces at the same time. I could even see behind me while hardly moving my head. I was fast approaching a magnificent city, golden and gleaming among a myriad of resplendent colors. The light I saw was the purest I had ever seen. And the music was the most majestic, enchanting, and glorious I had ever heard. I was still approaching the city, but now I was slowing down. Like a plane making its final approach for landing. I knew instantly that this place was entirely and utterly holy. Don't ask me how I knew, I just knew. I was overwhelmed by its beauty. It was breathtaking. And a strong sense of belonging filled my heart. I never wanted to leave. Somehow I knew I was made for this place and this place was made for me. The entire city was bathed in light, an opaque whiteness in which the light was intense but diffused. In that dazzling light every color imaginable seemed to exist and, what's the right word? Played. The colors seemed to be alive, dancing in the air. I had never seen so many different colors. It was breathtaking to watch. And I could have spent forever doing just that. The closer I got to the city, the more distinct the illumination became. The magnificent light I was experiencing emanated from about 40 or 50 miles within the city wall. From a focal point that was brighter than the sun. Oddly, it didn't make me squint to look at it. And all I wanted to do was to look at it. The light was palpable. It had substance to it, weight and thickness, like nothing I had ever seen before or since. The light from a hydrogen bomb is the closest I can come to describing it. Somehow I knew that light and life and love were connected and interrelated. Remarkably, the light didn't shine on things but through them. Through the grass. Through the trees. Through the wall. And through the people who were gathered there. There was a huge gathering of angels and people, millions, countless millions. They were gathered in a central area that seemed over 10 miles in diameter. The expanse of people was closer to an ocean than a concert hall. Waves of people, moving in the light, swaying to the music, worshiping God. Somehow the music in heaven calibrated everything, and I felt that nothing was rushed. I was outside the city, slowly moving toward its wall, suspended a few hundred feet above the ground. I'm not sure how I knew directions there, but I had a strong, almost magnetic sense that it was northwest. Which meant I was approaching the city from the southeast. A narrow road led to an entrance in the wall, which led into the city. I moved effortlessly along the road, escorted by my two angelic guides, on what seemed to be a divine schedule. Below me lay the purest, most perfect grass, precisely the right length and not a blade that was bent or even out of place. It was the most vibrant green the first had ever seen. If a color can be said to be alive, the green the first saw was alive, slightly transparent and emitting light and life from within each blade. The iridescent grass stretched endlessly over gently rolling hills upon which were sprinkled the most colorful wild flowers, lifting their soft-petaled beauty skyward, almost as if they were a chorus of flowers caught up in their own way of praising God. The fragrance that permeated heaven was so gentle and sweet, I almost didn't notice it amid all there was to see and hear. But as I looked at the delicate, perfect flowers and grass, I wanted to smell them. Instantly, I was aware of a gentle aroma. As I focused, I could tell the difference between the grass and the flowers, the trees and even the air. It was all so pure and intoxicating and blended together in a sweet and satisfying scent. In the distance stood a range of mountains, majestic in appearance, as if they reigned over the entire landscape. These were not mountains you wanted to conquer, these were mountains you wanted to revere. The road was only wide enough for 2 people and followed the contours of the hills. Then it began sloping upward toward the huge wall that encircled the city. Next I heard the faint sound of water rushing in the distance. I couldn't see the water, but it sounded as if it were rivers cascading over a series of small waterfalls, creating music that was ever-changing. Between the central part of the city and the city walls were groupings of brightly colored picture-perfect homes and small, quaint towns. Each home was customized and unique from the others yet blended harmoniously. Some were 3 or 4 stories, some were even higher. There were no 2 the same. If music could become homes, it would look like these, beautifully built and perfectly balanced. The city wall stretched out to my left and right as far as I could see in both directions. A powerful light permeated the wall and you could see all the colors of the rainbow in it. Strangely, whenever I moved, the colors moved ever so slightly as if sensing my movement and making an adjustment. My eyes were next drawn to a river that stretched from the gathering area in the middle of the city to the wall. It flowed toward the wall and seemed to end there, at least from my vantage point. The river was perfectly clear with a bluish-white hue. The light didn't shine on the water but mysteriously shone within it somehow. The flowers in heaven fascinated me. Again, a delightful and delicate balance between diversity and unity. Each was unique. All were one. And they were beautiful to behold. Each petal and leaf illuminated with that glorious light and added just the right splashes of color to the velvety expanse of green grass. As I described previously, the grass, the sky, the walls, the houses, everything was more beautiful than I ever dreamed anything could be. Even the colors. They were richer, deeper, more luminescent than any colors I have ever seen in the farthest reaches of Earth or in the most fantastic of dreams. They were so vibrant they pulsated with life. 1 Earth is the shadow. Heaven sounds like a place of imaginative fictional fantasy. But maybe the reason we possess within us such imaginative fictional capacity is because of a longing for eternity that God placed in the human heart. Like a bird's homing instinct, it's pointing us homeward. There's a little bird called the bar-tailed godwit that flies 15,000 miles round trip from Alaska to New Zealand each year. That's a long flight to a small island. What if they missed? They would be breeding with the penguins. But they don't miss. Ever. Something wired into them points them to New Zealand. God has also set eternity in the human heart, Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11. There is something wired into us that we all long for, something we crave, and yet every human experience leaves us still searching. As U2 sings, but I still haven't found what I'm looking for. All our longings point toward heaven. And NDRs say it's more real and far more beautiful than we can imagine. What would possess a veteran commercial airline pilot to make up such a tale? Or an even more confounding question, how did hundreds of people, doctors, airline pilots, bank presidents, tenured professors, who didn't need to make up wild stories to make money, and would lose professional credibility doing so, come to describe an amazingly similar place? The scriptures have always described just such a place, more beautiful than you can imagine. If you've ever secretly nursed a fear that heaven might be this ethereal, fuzzy, less than real, cloudy place, think again. The language of Scripture and the words NDRs use over and over again emphasize the opposite. This temporal, temporary, life is the fuzzy, less than real shadow of the brilliant, beautiful beyond your wildest dreams, solid life you need to grab onto. The 40 different writers of the Scriptures have revealed a consistent picture of heaven's superreality. God even had Israel build an earthly copy of a heavenly reality. Earthly priests serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and shadow of what is in heaven. This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle, "See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain." Hebrews 8 verse 5, italics mine. Randy Alcorn notes, the verses in Hebrews suggest that God created earth in the image of heaven, just as he created mankind in his image. 2 Alcorn points out that often our thinking is backwards. We think of earth as the real thing, and heaven as the ethereal, less than real shadow. But Scripture tells us, and NDEs attest, that the opposite is true. Earthly realities are derived from heaven's counterparts. This helps us better imagine heaven, when we realize that all we love about this earth is merely a shadow of the greater reality to come, a beautiful place made for us. The night before Jesus' crucifixion, he gathered for his last meal with his closest friends to assure them, "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, and trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you, so that you will always be with me where I am." John 14 verses 1-3 NLT. Imagine this place, full of the beauty God created on earth. Because after all, when God created the earth he declared, "It is good," Genesis 1, but earth's beauty has been marred by evil and subjected to death and decay, so that we will realize what's missing, God's perfect will and ways. All creation was subjected to God's curse. But with eager hope, the creation looks forward to the day when it will join God's children in glorious freedom from death and decay. Romans 8 verses 20-21 NLT. Imagine creation restored, more real, more beautiful, and more alive than ever. God promises that our earth will ultimately be renewed and joined with heaven, but the present heaven is already beautiful and glorious. The Old Testament prophet Isaiah took a trip to heaven and heard angels calling to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty, the whole earth is full of his glory." Isaiah 6 verses 1-3. Imagine all the beauty of earth, the majestic Sierras plunging into the deep blue California coastline, the purple and green aspen-lined mountain valleys of Colorado, the turquoise-encircled white sand beaches of the Virgin Islands, the gorgeous jagged coastlines of Hawaii. All of it reflects the beauty, splendor, and glory of God. If that's true, then why would we ever think heaven, where the Creator reigns, would be less glorious and beautiful than earth, where the Creator hides himself behind the knowledge of good and evil? The prophets like Isaiah were told by God that the new heaven and new earth will have similarities to the beauty of the present earth, but restored and improved. See, I will create new heavens and a new earth. I will create Jerusalem, the city of God, to be a delight and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people. They will build houses and dwell in them, they will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. Before they call I will answer, while they are still speaking I will hear. The wolf and the lamb will feed together. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, says the Lord. Isaiah 65 verses 17-25, God tells Isaiah his holy city will be a place of beauty and joy, with plants and trees, vineyards and fruit, mountains and valleys, where all of creation finally will live in harmony, as we intuitively know it should be. Through the wormhole. And why would we struggle to believe in a place called heaven, when science has been pointing to an unseen fifth dimension, wormholes through space-time, and theorized parallel universes as a possible explanation of the mysterious ways of nature? String theory proposes there are actually hidden dimensions beyond our three spatial dimensions of height, width, and depth. 3. Why then can't we conceive of heaven existing in a higher dimensional space we can't see? Science used to think of matter as solid, but we now know the tiny atoms that make up matter are more like invisible waves, more mind-like than particle-like. In fact, atoms are 99.999% empty space. For Cambridge and Princeton physicist James Jeans wrote, "The stream of knowledge is heading toward a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than like a machine. Mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We ought rather hail it as the governor of the realm of matter." 5. When people describe the transition from life to life, many experience leaving their bodies and observing the medical efforts from a point on the ceiling, but then many pass through a black tunnel, or in some cases a colorful tunnel or pathway that leads to this beautiful paradise like Dale Black described. I wonder if this tunnel is like a wormhole, leading out of our space-time dimension into heaven's expanded dimensions all around us. Moody talks about how everyone uses a little different language to describe the passageway, some a dark space, some an enclosure, a tunnel, a funnel, a vacuum, a void. 6. I went through this dark, black vacuum at super speed. Suddenly, I was in a very dark, very deep valley. It was as though there was a pathway, almost a road, through the valley, and I was going down the path. The thought came to me, well, now I know what the Bible means by the valley of the shadow of death because I've been there. See Psalm 23 verse 4.7. Karen, whom I personally interviewed, caught the swine flu and was dying. She told me she passed out of her body into a dark void that was not scary, it was the most peaceful, joyful experience ever. There she saw her grandmother and she realized she must return to her body, she still had work to do on earth. Perhaps Karen and others in the dark void have not gone through the wormhole yet. What's clear for those like Dale Black who pass through, there is a world of exquisite beauty waiting on the other side, a beauty even the blind can see. Unblind beauty Brad Barrows, like Vicky, had been blind since birth and had an NDE at age 8. He had never seen anything, nor did he have mental concepts or pictorial images of anything. Brad lived at the Boston Center for Blind Children when severe pneumonia caused his heart to stop for 4 minutes. Somewhere in the middle of the night, Brad told Ken Ring, I began to become very stiff and rigid, and I was gasping for air. I really thought I was about to die. It was as if my being was slowly floating up through the room. Ring notes that Brad was close to the ceiling and could see his apparently lifeless body on the bed. He also saw his blind roommate get up from his bed and leave the room to get help. His roommate later confirmed this. Next, he found that he was able to penetrate the second-floor ceiling of his room and, like Vicky, soon found that he was going straight up toward the roof of the building, actually up and over it. Brad could see snow everywhere except for the streets, which had been plowed. He saw a streetcar go by. Finally, he recognized a playground used by the children of his school and a particular hill he used to climb nearby. When Ring asked if he knew or saw these things, Brad said, I clearly visualized them. I could suddenly notice them and see them. I was able to see quite clearly. Ring and Cooper, who studied 21 blind people who had NDEs, postulate a kind of vision they coin mindsight, a visual perception blind NDers experience beyond normal vision. At this point, in almost exact parallel with Vicky, Brad was aware of being pulled at perhaps a 45-degree angle upward into a dark tunnel where he noticed the absence of his newfound sight. When I actually got into the tunnel, I do remember that one thing that puzzled me was the lack of any color. I began to wonder if this was darkness. There was no color whatsoever. It was as black as I can understand blackness to be. But coming out into a large field, the closest I could tell you about color was that the brightness and brilliance of that whole area was absolutely indescribable. I could not distinguish fine shades of color, for some reason. It's possible that I could have, but I had no vocabulary to describe it. I've been told when I was a very young child of 4 or 5 that grass could be brown or green or that the sky could be blue, but even then my concept of colors, my perception of colors, still remained absolutely beyond my reach. I felt as if I might be entering another realm altogether, an unexplained dimension that I had very little understanding of. As Brad approached the end of the tunnel, he was aware of an immense field stretching before him for what seemed like miles. He noticed, for example, huge palm trees with enormous leaves, and very tall grass as well. Brad's experience of the field reminds me of a doctor and his wife who came to our church because of their twins, one who almost died at 3 years old. Neither parent had faith in God nor had they ever talked about God or Jesus. Their kids had never been to church. Yet as the son was being tucked into bed one night, he declared, I want to run through the fields and play with Jesus again. His mother was shocked and kept asking who told him about Jesus. They surely hadn't. He insisted that Jesus came and got him from the hospital and they ran and played in beautiful meadows together. Their son's detailed experience led his mom and dad to explore faith and eventually come to believe. Maybe it was the same field Brad walked through. When I noticed that I was walking up this field, it seemed as if I was so exhilarated and so unbelievably renewed that I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay forever where I was. It was so unbelievably peaceful that there is no way that I could describe the peace and the tranquility and the calm. The weather was absolutely perfect in terms of temperature and humidity. It was so fresh, so unbelievably fresh that mountain air on Earth could not even come close. A blind person would notice non-visual environs most. There was tremendous light up there. It seemed to come from every direction. It was all around and everywhere that I happened to be looking. It seemed like everything, even the grass I had been stepping on, seemed to soak in that light. It seemed like the light could actually penetrate through everything that was there, even the leaves on the trees. There was no shade, there was no need for shade. The light was actually all-encompassing. Yet I wondered how I could know that because I had never seen before that point. At first I was taken aback by sight. I did not understand what sensation I was experiencing. While I was moving through this particular field, I seemed to accept it very readily. I felt like I wouldn't understand it had it happened on Earth. But where I was able to accept it almost immediately. Like Vicky, Dale, Marv, and many others, Brad notices light, which felt like love, coming out of the grass and leaves. I find it fascinating that they all describe the same intriguing way that God's light comes out of nature. But how would blind people get that idea? They would never have heard people talking about light coming out of grass and trees. Like Vicky and others, Brad also becomes aware of thousands of voices singing. I remember thinking that the voices seemed to be singing in a language I had never understood, or maybe many, many languages. The music I had heard was nothing like anything I have ever experienced on Earth, nor have I ever experienced. By this time, I was getting closer to the music and being absolutely fascinated by it. I wanted to join in with this music. It was absolutely precious. Within a very short amount of time, and I had no idea how much time had actually elapsed, but as I was going up the hill, I came to a large stone structure. I could tell that it was stone without even touching it. They were almost like gemstones. They seemed to literally shine with their own particular light. Yet the light itself was actually penetrating right through the stones. 8 Jesus' youngest disciple, John, had a vision of heaven recorded in Revelation. Brad is describing the Great Wall and the beauty surrounding the city that John wrote about, and the angel carried me away in the spirit to a mountain great and high, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem. It shone with the glory of God, and its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great, high wall with 12 gates. The foundations of the city walls were decorated with every kind of precious stone. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. Revelation 21 verses 10 to 12, 19, 23, italics mine. I used to think the descriptions in Revelation were purely metaphorical. While I still think much is symbolic, when so many NDRs, even blind ones, describe the same supernatural beauty John described, you have to wonder. If it's true, imagine how awesome, how intriguingly beautiful, how much like Earth heaven will feel, and yet so much more alive, all of it vibrant, colorful, infused with the very light and life of God permeating everything. Meadows, grass, and trees. A colorblind British NDR suddenly saw beauty in all kinds of colors with a new vision many speak about. What I saw was too beautiful for words. I was looking at a magnificent landscape full of flowers and plants that I couldn't actually name. It all looked hundreds of miles away. And yet I could see everything in detail. It was both far away and close. It was completely three-dimensional and about 1,000 times more beautiful than my favorite holiday destination in spring. I was always surrounded by loving spiritual beings of light. 9. Because most people have never read Revelation, they don't realize the earth-like beauty John mentions in his vision of heaven. After this I saw people from every nation and tribe and people and language. They were clothed in white robes and held palm branches in their hands. He will lead them to springs of life-giving water. He took me in the spirit to a great, high mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem. It shone with the glory of God. Then the angel showed me a river with the water of life, clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. It flowed down the center of the main street. On each side of the river grew a tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit. Revelation 7 verses 9 and 17, 21 verse 10, 22:1, 2 NLT. Brad and others claim to see exactly what Scripture says, a beautiful place of mountains, streams, trees, and apparently amazing grass. Marv Bestman, as a retired bank president, loved to golf. So naturally, what he noticed in heaven was the grass. I saw babies and children and grown-ups of all ages playing and talking and laughing on grass that was the greenest green I've ever seen. Picture the verdant, luscious grass at the Masters golf tournament, and then try to imagine grass far greener and more deluxe. That's how green the grass is in heaven. 10 flowers and forest forever. At age 5, Margaret was misdiagnosed with scarlet fever. In reality, her appendix had ruptured and the infection took her to the edge of death. One night, says Margaret, this marvelous feeling of peace came over me. I was basking in that because it was so beautiful, when suddenly I became aware that someone was holding my right hand. I looked up and my eyes were traveling over a white gown. I came to the head of this beautiful woman. She walked along with me holding my hand. I became aware of a fragrance in the air that was becoming stronger and stronger. It was of flowers, and they just seemed to permeate my whole body. And when I took notice of what was around me besides her, I realized that the path was banked with flowers way over our heads. These flowers were close together the way a colonial bouquet would be, and they were massive. I was just so overwhelmed by this fragrance that I said to her like a little kid, which I was, "Are these flowers real?" She smiled and looked down at me and said, "Yes, they are." I could see her chuckling, trying to hold back a laugh. After this beautiful woman told her she must go back, it took Margaret a year to recover. Years later, in her 60s, she decided to paint the beautiful arbor pathway of heaven. While painting it, Margaret had to see her doctor. Her doctor mentioned near-death experiences, and she told him she was painting hers. He asked for a reproduction of it, and the doctor ended up hanging Margaret's painting among 10 other pictures in his office. Several weeks later, a new patient named Mary Olivia came into the doctor's office. As a single mom facing a terminal illness with 3 children, she needed a second opinion. When Mary saw the painting in the doctor's office, she just stood and stared for several minutes before exclaiming to the doctor, "I know where this is." He said, "You know what that's a picture of?" "Of course I do. I walked along that path when I was 5 years old and almost died." Mary relayed how the man, capitalized at her request, said he would always be with her as they walked beneath the arbor's beautiful flowers. Did 2 5-year-olds really walk through the same flower-lined arbor in heaven? Margaret feels God led her to paint that picture because Mary Olivia needed to be reminded, "I'm always with you," Matthew 18 verse 20. 11 Scripture tells us of a beauty in heaven, not unlike the flowers and forests of earth, yet so much greater. Dr. Richard Eby considered himself an amateur botanist, and he couldn't even name all the varieties of trees and flowers he saw during his NDE. He also noticed a new type of life in the flora. My gaze riveted the exquisite valley in which I found myself. Forests of symmetrical trees, unlike anything on earth, covered the foothills on each side. I could see each branch and leaf, not a brown spot or dead leaf in the forest. No death there includes the vegetation. They resembled somewhat the tall arborvitae cedars of North America, but I could not identify them. The valley floor was gorgeous.